Hey, this is Jono's World, conversation for everybody. Hello, everyone. This is I think it's episode 5, even though I put 4 up in the title, of Jono's World podcast. And I have Willie Carver with me today. He is the 2022 Kentucky Teacher of the Year. He was a gay kid from up the holler that went from there to Good Morning America. And now he's on Jono's World podcast because, I'm cool like that, and I can get cool to guest. So, Will, introduce yourself. Where are you from? What part of Appalachia do you hail from?
Hey, everybody. Willie Carver here. I'm from
Any pronouns?
Any pronouns. Call me what you want as long as you call me. I'm from the Eastern Coalfield, so Floyd County specifically, and pretty much lived my whole life in Floyd County until at least my whole childhood. Currently reside in Mount Sterling, which calls itself the Gateway region, which it invented because it felt culturally listless, because we're right on the cusp of Appalachia and the Woodgrass region. But I'm not a gatekeeper, so anybody wants to call themselves Appalachian, and again, if other people want to gatekeep, you go for it. You have fun. But I was successfully convinced by a woman from Pittsburgh that she should be Appalachian, and I'm like, you know what? Why not?
Technically, Pittsburgh is in Appalachia.
Yeah.
And when you look at the reach of the foothills, and then if you look at the historic reach, like even Florida would be considered part of Appalachia. And so, go ahead, claim it if you want.
Yeah, I'm more the merrier.
More the merrier.
Happy to be here. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes.
I've been,
but there's a huge difference between Appalachia and Floyd County than Appalachia and Pittsburgh.
Oh yeah, listen. My friend Courtney, I love her to death. I kind of admire her for this, but like, she is the capital G gatekeeper. Like, I've heard her refuse Appalachianness on like people from in the city of Pikeville. She's like, well, I don't know. I mean, Pike County maybe, but Pikeville, you're not Appalachian. Like, unless you were born into a pot of gravy, like, you ain't Appalachian to her.
Does Big Creek, Kentucky count?
Is that Pike County, not Pikeville?
No, that's in between Hyden and Hazard.
Hazard is the origin of the universe. It is the center and heart of Appalachia, as far as I'm concerned.
It's the Queen City.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Queen City.
It is. Actually, speaking of Hazard, I had some grant money for a thing, and we had a bunch left over because the costs weren't as much. So rather than give it back, I wrote it was the It Gets Better project. We just had our first rural queer conference. Might be the first rural queer conference in America, certainly in Appalachia, from the It Gets Better project. And we had some money left over, so I was like, hey, can we have 2 more, we're calling them Rainbow Freedom Libraries, so LGBTQ young adult libraries. And they said yes, so we're going to be putting one in Knott County with a group called the Sapling Center, and that will serve us Knott and Perry County, so we're excited.
Nice.
Never thought we'd have a Knott County LGBTQ Freedom Library.
Nope. That is definitely progress. That is something I'm excited to hear. As you know, Knott County is kind of close. So Big Creek. So if you're coming down Mountain Parkway or Hal Rogers Parkway or whatever it's called today, Daniel Boone National Forest Parkway. When you're coming down exit 56, right before you get into Hazard, where you go up the hill to the hospital and all that kind of stuff, like just on the outskirts, you dive off an exit, you go a bunch of windy roads. It might pop a video up or something of what it looks like, but you talk about country
right there. That is trees and kudzu.
Yes, that's all. Elk, bear. I mean, there's probably more bears than people, to be honest. Moonshiners.
Speaking of that parkway, I was in college at Moorhead, early 2000s, poetry course. And there was a girl in there who was from Cincinnati. And it was a poetry workshop, so we all, would submit work. And the poem she submitted was beautiful. It's called Sister Girl. I remember the title. And I remember one of the lines was, I want to ride your lips. Ride your hips and kiss your lips and taste your honey from its jar. So I saw her working in the kitchen at campus, and I was like, "Oh my god, I love this so much! Like, I cannot tell you how much I love this poem." So when we would share poetry, we got to tell the professor what we wanted to do, whether we would read it, he would read it, or someone from class. So she was like, "I want Willie to read it," and you could tell like it was not sitting well with him. And he goes, "Well, now that is a choice." And he described. Here's how he said. He said, "So I feel like this poem is a very urban piece, and Willie clearly comes from." And then he goes, "South of the Mountain Parkway." Someday I want to write a novel just called "South of the Mountain Parkway."
South and Mountain that he deserves credit for that one.
Yeah, he
Because
was
there is
right.
I mean, for people who aren't from there or aware, the difference
Mm-hmm.
is outstanding.
Mm-hmm.
When you cross the Kentucky Mason Dixon, which is the Mountain Parkway,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden, the sky gets smaller because all
Yeah.
those mountains are popping up. You are officially in a
Mm-hmm.
different world.
And I thought, because I didn't travel around a lot when I was a kid, I thought
No, but you don't leave.
Oh yeah, and I thought the South was the South. I thought like it's all the same, and so I left Appalachia, moved to France. But I was in a place called Picardy, so it's like the northern part of France. There used to be coal mines. The coal mines shut down. Poverty ensued. There's a lot of generational knowledge that people sort of share just to get by. They have really strong regional accents, so a lot of them are ashamed to leave. Like I felt home, so at home in Picardy,
Right.
and then I moved from there to Athens, Georgia, and had like legitimate like emotional issues because of the culture shock. Because I had never seen poor or rich Southern people, and then there were idiots, and I'm like, I can excuse
Yep.
somebody saying and doing stupid stuff if they've not had the ability to learn about it. I can't excuse it if they have a 4-year degree. So suddenly, like, there's a difference between like ignorant and evil. Deep
You
South.
saw the willfulness, like
Mhm.
we actually have access to all this information, but we're choosing to ignore it.
Right, right.
You saw that part of the South.
Yes.
Normally they live in big white houses, and
With fake columns.
yeah, with fake columns.
Just before it sounds like this, I learned true racism when I moved to the Northeast. So this has nothing to do with the South.
Right.
Racism is everywhere. It's
It's
just
everywhere.
the way I interpret what that person's doing is going to be contingent upon their context, right? And the context of somebody growing up in trees and kudzu and Hazard, especially back then. Now is a different world versus New England versus Atlanta. Those are different worlds.
Different. It's not the same part of the South.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't have internet until I was in college before I had access to
Mm-hmm.
internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so like your outside world is you don't have the access culturally. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have the different cultures to come in and like educate you. You don't have the diversity. You don't have. It's just not there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you really, when you leave Appalachia, woo,
Mm-hmm.
you really, it's a different experience.
I think I think what happens a lot with Appalachia too. It's like we're at a time in American history where liberal politics believes that people who have been traditionally minoritized have something to say. And
Right.
so you can leave your community and still be respected as a member of that community. This is not true for Appalachia. Um, I personally think it's a form of racism that we do not talk about because here's what I think happens a lot of times with say liberal urban people, and this is not everyone, but what happens a lot is if someone speaks a certain way or thinks a certain way, they will allow that as long as that person isn't white, right? And they'll say, well, this is their culture, this is their whatever. But the moment a white person speaks in a different way or thinks a different way, suddenly they're ignorant. And I think it
They're
comes
ignorant and
it
they're
comes from their belief
uneducated.
that white people sort of should know better and other people shouldn't know better as if better exists, as if that's a thing.
Right.
There is no better. Um, And I think it's a weirdly racist thing, this belief that somehow white people should be held to this really, and high in their perspective, not my perspective, but that
Right.
white people should be held to a standard. But we can't talk about that.
No, no. And when you're in Appalachia, and we'll get to this. So you said in the ABC interview that you knew you were going to be a teacher
Mm-hmm.
as early as kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I was in kindergarten, I was convinced I was going to be G.I. Joe, a bulldozer operator, um, and that was about it. You know, maybe a logger. Like that's what
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking. I never dreamed of hosting a podcast, where I'm interviewing Teacher of the Year and an author, and where Tony Delk's going to be coming on, and
So excited.
I never, none of that was in my head until
Mm-hmm.
way later. How at that young, 6 years old, did you just go, I'm going to be a teacher?
You know, I think about my nephew. He wanted to be
Uh,
a coal truck, not a coal truck driver. Like he was like, I'm gonna be a coal truck.
mm,
Kids, I think, when they're in that young, imaginative stage, like they want to be whatever is most powerful. Whatever, and powerful can mean. I think it means a totally different thing to a kid. It's like what dreams might actually exist, what pleasures, what excitement, what fun could actually exist. And that's what they kind of envision. So maybe that means being an actual coal truck when you're a kid.
right.
And for me, that was teachers. I think, and I am not speaking in any monolithic way about Appalachia or queer people. I'm just talking about my experience. But my experience was from people who had been given the short end of the stick in life over and over and over again. And despite that, at times soared. But there was a resigned nature to the people I encountered a lot. Like, well, there's nothing we can do about that. It's just going to happen, ain't it? Um, and so I saw people who really didn't imagine a whole lot, who didn't hope for a
Yeah.
whole lot. They would just work and see what happened. And it's like that in a lot of Appalachia. There's almost this like superstition, like you can't speak into name something really good. My husband used to drive him crazy when if we were doing something really nice, like I don't know, going to the beach. He said, you'll pick up the phone and go, yeah, we're going to the beach. Like it's the worst thing ever. And I was like, I had never
If the
thought about it.
Lord, the Lord willing, and the creek don't
Yes,
rise.
right. And I hadn't thought about it, but I'm like, I think there's something like ingrained in me that I don't want to get too excited lest it be taken. And I don't want other people to feel bad about something good happening to me because I know what
Right.
it's like. So anyway, teachers, on the other hand, like I caught on early. Like you walk into that room and there's a woman in front of you who believes that you could be anything, and they believed it. Like I could see it. I could see their approach to how they taught us to write, how they taught us to use commas, how they taught us to use math. Like they think I'm going to use this someday. They think I'm
Right.
going to be somebody important, and they did it too, right? So they saw kids who couldn't do something, and then those kids could do it. So like for me, it was magical. Even in kindergarten, I felt the kind of magic of that hope that education can bring, and so
Right.
I wanted to be a part of that immediately.
Yeah. So I discovered that at a much, much, much later age. Um, so for me, when I was in kindergarten, I had undiagnosed autism,
Mm-hmm.
or back then it would have been called Asperger's, and I had ADHD. Well, no H, it's all ADHD now. Back then it was ADD, and so I was left-handed, and so my experience wasn't inspiring at all. My hand was tied to my leg. I was constantly put in the corner because I couldn't behave. And then I was relegated to a classroom that I was far too smart for. I'm testing in the top 3, top 2% in the state in math, and they put me in these special classes just because of my behavior. But
Mm-hmm.
they forced me to do the work 3 grade levels behind me, and so my experience was not inspiring at all.
One
And
of the things that causes animosity between, honestly, me and some of my teacher friends is, for me, when I think about education, it is super important when when it gets it wrong, for us to speak out hard and heavy handed. And a lot of
yeah,
them they want to see things in binary ways. And they're like, oh, you have to be pro education. You can never say anything negative. And I'm like, absolutely not. I will say things that are negative. I am fortunate in that, outside of, honestly, the way school tried to erase the Appalachian in you, outside of that, I was well made for it. I had ADHD, but reading was my passion. So I would finish my work and then immediately read something quietly. Like, that's all I wanted in the world, was to quietly read. So it worked for me. I was not ready to come out in high school, so I didn't have any school trying to fight me, So that worked for me. But once I became a teacher, I started seeing those systems that were hurting people, and I speak out about them a lot. And I have other teachers who claim that I'm somehow anti-school, and I say I've never been pro-school. I'm pro-child.
right.
In an ideal
Well,
world, it should be the same. And if they're not, I have to speak out.
how does the teacher of the year be anti-school?
Um,
The Kentucky teacher of the year is anti-school.
that's the argument. But it's little things like, one of the things that I say now that drives people crazy is, if you are a teacher in Kentucky schools, you are harming queer kids, period. And a lot of teachers don't want to face that. What they want to say is, well, I'm an ally. And I'm like, are you erasing queer people from your curriculum because it's now required? Then you're harming them, right? Doesn't mean you want to harm them. Doesn't mean you're a bad person, but it does mean you are involved in a system that perpetuates harm. And if you don't speak to that, if you don't acknowledge it, then you're just going to keep on doing it. And the easiest thing to do would be to say, well, I'm a good person and the system is broken. Let's not think about this. But hell no, you need to think about it daily. So I say these things out loud, and then teachers will get offended. And the truth will stand when the world's on fire. It's going to stand.
Right.
And the truth is, teachers don't want to talk about it, which led me to say something else, which I still believe. A lot of teachers, I think, personally, teachers who otherwise are not homophobic, who do not hate LGBTQ people, I think they were relieved when Kentucky passed Senate Bill 150, because it basically told them you don't have to fight anymore.
Yeah, I
Before
could
Senate Bill
address it.
150, every single teacher had to make a stand. You had to either include or not include, right? And so we could say, hey, are you going to stand with us on this? And they had to make a choice. Now they don't have to make a choice, right? I think they would have been just as relieved if some other bill had passed that was pro LGBTQ. But this takes the stress off of them. And anyone who
Yeah.
is perpetuating harm has to acknowledge it. When I taught English, I had to acknowledge the harm that the English test does. The ACT English test is it's the most racist test that we still give. It's certainly anti-Appalachian. I had to acknowledge that.
Oh, it's horrible.
I had to
Yeah.
face, like, how do I teach this? And so
Right.
what that would do is, I had to develop a way of teaching English that always taught the correct way as something racist that exists, right? Um, so I could teach racism and standard English at the same time, but not standard English as being better, as being an obstacle. And
Right.
a lot of people don't want to have to wrestle with that. So, if I were teaching history right now, I would say, I would probably make an acknowledgement at the beginning of every class. There are LGBTQ people and stories that I can't teach you. Here are their names. You should learn about them. Like, if you acknowledge that you're doing harm, then you can come to conclusions like that. If you
Yeah.
don't acknowledge it, then you won't do anything.
Yeah. Did you use your computer today?
That I
Yeah.
I have
Think you better think a gay person.
good
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
Mr. Turing.
Yep. And now, so when I say, we talk about our childhoods in Appalachia, and you know, it was rough. Like, my childhood was rough. It was very poor. I was the kind of kid who was busting up coal and taking it in and putting it in a coal stove to stay warm. Hand me down clothes, mountain missions, classic
Hmm.
classic Appalachia. Everybody that I knew was either a construction worker or a coal miner, and didn't have any aspirations of being anything else. My grandpa was a bricklayer, and Other than that, it's all coal mining and train yards and union workers, and they were in the coal wars, and it's that type of Appalachian family that's just kind of like settled in there. And so, I didn't have any kind of like shoot for the moon people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that was something that like really was way later. But for you, like it seems like it clicked pretty early. But when did you? And I'm going to say like a title of something, and
Mm-hmm.
because clearly you knew before then, before this moment.
Mm-hmm.
When I say this is how I want to die, what does that mean to you?
Um, means poetry. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I was in 10th grade, I do believe. And my high school English teacher, like any high school English teacher, I'm not slacking off on this, was like, I was like, hey, I finished all my work. And she said, here, read this book. So she handed me the anthology, and I was kind of flipping through it, which is exactly what I just told you earlier about, what ADHD looked like for me. Because like
Right.
anyone else, like, hey, there's nothing to do. I need, something, or else I'm going to snap. And she was like, flip through this book. So I was happily flipping through the book. And there was a picture of the Starry Night. Like any other human, like that painting sort of is arresting, and I was sort of staring at it. And then off to the right, there was a little poem by Anne Sexton. It was ekphrastic, where she kind of looks at the painting and then interprets it, called "This Is How I Want to Die." And that was the first time I read a poem. I mean, I had been given poems and I had like been told to solve them, but that was the first time I read a poem and caught what they do. She enters into this magical world of like death and heat and being dissolved into nothing and wanting it. And years later, I looked at that painting and I see that's what it's really about. You got all these little houses just huddled together against the darkness, but up in the sky, there's this giant burning something, and it's real and it's there. Um, so I read that poem and felt it deep inside of my soul, below words. And that ignited my love for poetry. I suddenly realized, like, oh, that's the crazy thing about what poetry does for me. When you have a painting, this kitchen's full of paintings. I'm looking at one right over here that my husband. I'll send you a link that my husband drew of a tree. As I'm looking at it, there are words happening in the back of my mind, so that even my experience of it is kind of word based. But
Right.
when you're reading a poem, the poem takes control of your words and forces you to like
To paint.
look in them, and then the feelings are nonverbal. What's happening down below. Toni Morrison calls this a flood on your skin that you can feel with poems. Anyway, Anne Sexton lit that fire, lit that spark. Took me a good decade before I could write a poem. But I think about that poem all the time, honestly.
Nice. I knew just from some of this, research, like that was one of the things that popped up. And um, when did you feel the confidence, living in Appalachia, the culture, not exactly the safest.
Mm-hmm.
When did you feel confidence to step out and be gay? Like
Um,
when did you know you were gay for one? Like
yeah. Thank you, Morehead State University. I'm going to say that for the rest of my life. I knew it's weird. We're just talking about words and what they mean. I knew the word gay as early as like first grade. My mom had gay friends, but I didn't associate them with gay because the only knowledge I had of gay was like evil people, because that's what church told us. So I had
right.
this idea that like whatever gay was, it was something evil and awful. I knew mom had effeminate friends and that people made fun of them. I didn't think about the fact that my mom was still friends with them, at least, like that they had somebody. I just knew it was something awful. So even though I knew that I wanted a boyfriend and I knew that I had crushes on boys, I did not know that I was gay. As weird as that is. Probably by fifth, and I have an excellent childhood memory, so I remember first grade through maybe fifth grade, wrestling with this. By fifth grade, I knew I was gay, and I had said the words out loud to myself, like literally whispering it and putting it out into the universe. And then I kind of just held that in until college. It was actually, I didn't know it at the time, but it was National Coming Out Day. I was with my friend Carrie. We were on the pier of Eagle Lake in Moorhead, and I came out to her. I think being in college and like seeing gay people, like that was what helped me because I had not really seen them. I had a third cousin, Jamie, who was gay. So I was vaguely aware that he existed, but he ran away like everybody else, so I never got to see him. So for me, it was just like invisible impossibility. One of my professors knew that I was gay. So she invited me to be her research assistant, and she would take me to conferences all the time. And at every conference, she would introduce me to all of these men who were obviously gay, just in like, hey, Willie, this is my colleague, Dr. So-and-so, who does research on this.
Building your confidence that you can be normal.
I didn't think about it for a long time, but it was years later that I was like, you always did that. And she said, I wanted you to believe that you could live.
Yeah.
And so that's why it matters so much to me to fight against this Republican narrative that anything gay is somehow sexual and therefore you can't even say the word gay in front of kids. We just had a youth conference on Saturday. It was organized by students, and the entirety of the conference was focused on joy, hope, fighting back, and getting access to knowledge about mental health resources and some of the bills that are happening. Nothing sexual at all about it, right? But that doesn't. The reality doesn't matter. What matters is that Republicans want to spin this narrative, and
the gay agenda.
Yeah, and that narrative makes it terrifying for people who could make sure that kids live actually do it. Because they're, what the single worst thing that you can say about somebody is that they are a groomer or a pedophile, right?
Right.
And so that's why it's so important to me that young people have the opportunity to see older LGBTQ people. Although the first time a kid called me an elder, I nearly fainted.
Listen, we're there. We're there, man.
I did a reading in Berea. Actually, it was really sweet. It was to the LGBTQ group, but there was actually a group of students who are neurodivergent who meet once a week. And so the two groups merged for this reading. Nice. So we were seated on, what are they called? Like bean bags. So I'm doing this reading seated on a bean bag, basically staring at the ceiling, because I think it made a lot of people more comfortable not to have to like look at me while I was reading.
Especially for us autistic people.
Yeah, especially.
It is much easier for me to look at a screen than sit at a table with you.
Yeah. So it was exactly that. So I know that this was important for these young people. And then, I had to sacrifice my need to like be able to look at people and know how they felt and just believe like they invited me here, so they want me here. So I kind of read. And then afterwards, one of them came up and said like, it was so inspiring to meet a gay elder. We never get to see people like you, but, I'll take it. I like being an elder.
Well, yeah. And you're out there, like you're an author, like you're doing, like you're doing all this good stuff. Like you are a shining example of like, hey, don't believe this BS narrative that these Ron DeSantis jokers are putting out there.
Yeah.
Margie Taylor Greens and Lauren Boeberts, like it's sickening. It's sickening. And so you graduate Moorhead. You have this awesome teacher who helps you build your confidence. You start teaching. Where are you teaching at? Like, what part of Kentucky are you in?
So I started actually in France, in Picardy, then moved to Georgia and thought, I want to be a professor because I had such a good experience. I had been in grad school 3 semesters. There were parts of it I really liked, mainly the learning. And then there were parts I didn't like, mainly like the politics of scooting around a university. But I just had this moment in class one day where I looked around. It was advanced historical romance linguistics. And I thought, my sister is smarter than everyone in this room. Every PhD student, every master's student, smarter than the professor, smarter than me. Why is she not in this room? My sister got a high school diploma. And you don't have to go to college. But the question is, why didn't she have that opportunity? So I decided then and there, like, okay, my life's choice has to be to get into K through
Go
12 and
home.
help young people go to college. So I went home and then did my master's at Moorhead in teaching. And there, I've been working in Montgomery County for 15 years. So weirdly enough, that first year was pretty traumatic. They found out that I was gay because I was not in the closet after I came out in college. One of the principals pulled me into her office and was like, just so I understand, you are openly gay. And I said, yeah. And she said, well, just so you understand, in this town, you will be crucified and no one will protect you. First year teachers back then had to get, they were completing an internship. So they actually got a signature at the end of the year in order to have a
Same
license.
thing. It's still the same.
Still the same.
Yeah.
Kentucky got rid of it because Kentucky has no teachers now, so they'll pretty much take
That's
anybody.
true.
Yes, but they used to. So I knew, like, shit, I have to do well this year, or else I don't have a license and I can't leave here. So I went into the closet for the first time in my life. I gained 70 pounds from the stress of it, and then my husband and I moved to New England, to Vermont, because it was the safest place we thought we could be. And I'm glad for those 2 years. There was a lot of safety as a queer person.
Yeah.
There was just space to breathe for a second. And I learned a lot about just the nature of people in general while I was up there. That people are pretty much good. Systems are bad. Systems are corrupt. And I got a call from the same school, a new principal, a new superintendent, and they basically said, we heard what happened. We would like to invite you back. So I went back, and it was good for a few years. And then,
Yeah. And so
took over.
in 2022, you win Kentucky Teacher of the Year. And at the same time, on, I think it was Good Morning America, you said that there was people, even though you win this award, saying you don't deserve to be a teacher, you don't deserve to do this, making threats against you, to the point where you had to get the police involved. What on earth? How does the Teacher of the Year get that kind of backlash just because he wears rainbow glasses?
You just answered the question. Is the funny part. So I mean, it was not easy, especially since pretty much the election of Trump. That opened up the door in a lot of rural schools to this belief that using the N word, using the F slur, being as homophobic or as transphobic or as racist as you want is somehow protected political stance. And I was suddenly working in schools.
Free speech.
I heard we would hear the N word 5 times a day in the hallway. The schools would punish black kids, brown kids for being harassed. I'm not joking. I had an Asian American student who was being targeted in a class that he was in. It was one of those optional classes.
Called the C word?
Called all kinds of words. And the school responded by pulling him out of the class because he had 3 bullies, and it would just be too complicated to pull the bullies out of class. And their response to him was, well, they have their right to their political beliefs. So they pulled that boy out of class. That's the kind of stuff, and that's just a drop in a million things that were kind of happening. But most of the complaints that I have were about how the school was handling stuff inside of school. That year, the Kentucky Teacher of the Year program does not go through each district. If it did, there would be no chance. There is no chance I would have been teacher of the hallway. My district hated me at this point because I fought back. One of the interesting things about the way education works in America, there is no accrediting agency at all that requires teachers to have any education in teacher law or in education law. None. I had those courses as part of my master's just because they were the only ones offered that particular year because I wanted to get it done really, really quickly. So I had those courses, but most teachers don't know what their rights are. So what I was able to do every single time my school would try to get me to do something illegal, I would go, I can't do that because it's illegal and you know that. And then they would back off. So when they would try to say like, well, your LGBTQ group can't meet, or you can't put this on the school website, I would always say, yes, I can. This is a limited open forum. You're legally required to let us, or else you're breaking the law. So they hated me.
FCA gets their groups.
Yep. So I was able to do a lot, despite the fact that the school didn't want me there, because I knew the law and because I was tenured, to be honest. So that particular year, I get chosen, and I was so not expecting it. When I got nominated, I laughed at it, and then my students found out I was nominated, and they were making fun of it. And then one of them goes, yeah, like they'd let some big gay teacher, a big gay Appalachian be teacher of the year. And then everybody kind of laughed, but it kept me awake that night because I was like, that student is a big gay Appalachian. She knows she's not talking about me. She's talking about herself. She knows that this is her way of cushioning herself for the rest of her life and reminding herself that she's not going to have opportunities. So I was like, I have to try now. I have to let these kids see me being hopeful. I can't be that person that believes that the world isn't going to be better. So I announced to my LGBTQ group, hey, this has happened. What do you all want to talk about? What do you think are things that we're doing really well as a school? So I really use it for them to shine, and let them talk about what they wanted to talk about. Even my
poems and poetry and expressions.
I got to take pictures of the work that they were doing. And I thought, well, even if I don't win, at least these kids can shine at the state level. And then we won. But that shined a light in a really dark place. And, if you ever go into the kitchen and flip the light on in the middle of the night, if you have any roaches, that's when you're going to see them. Because they like to hide. So that's what happened. So a group.
I remember having a creek rat in my kitchen in Eastern Kentucky once. You ever seen a creek rat?
We have one that learned to open the fridge.
Good Lord.
It absolutely learned to open the fridge. It was coming up through a hole. We covered the hole, and it actually set off a mouse trap my mom had put up. Those things are so big. It'd be like setting one up for a human. It literally crawled back through the floor and pulled its leg down, and the rat trap was upside down covering the hole. So it just used the hole as like a mechanism for restriction so that it could get it off.
So it could just pull its leg off.
Yes. So that's exactly what happened. So this group, headed by a woman named Heather Leibel, interestingly enough, that was her last name, started going to board meetings. And you already know what they said. It was this man must be a groomer. Why else does he have an LGBTQ group? This is inappropriate. He shouldn't be allowed around children. Now, mind you, none of them had ever met me. None of them had ever met anyone who met me. None of them talked to a single one of the parents of students who were in this group. None of that mattered. All that mattered is they saw me with rainbow glasses saying the word gay in Appalachian, and that was enough to set them off. So I had to hire lawyers, and the lawyers were like, don't talk. Don't say anything. So I didn't talk. I didn't say anything. That tends to piss people off. So then they started going online. They went back years trying to find anything they could possibly find. They couldn't find anything. So the stuff they found was really stupid, like memes about medieval people who were drunk. Like, I'm not even joking. Like that was, and so I made fun of their attempts there, and that pissed them off. So then they went after my students. So we're talking teenagers. They were suggesting that the older students were grooming younger students. They started sharing pictures of my kids at their after school jobs with their names and their faces on the posts. We're in a small town. These kids were in danger. The police actually had to contact one of them to say, we believe there's a viable threat against you. You need to leave your home. Parents were emailing me, begging the school and CCing me, like, please do something, please protect these kids. And the school wouldn't even so much as post something nice about this group.
Wouldn't put out a statement, nothing.
Mind you, when one of our board members got caught shoplifting at Walmart, they were the first to put up a statement about how they stood behind her. But she was a woman with connections and money. Kids don't have connections and kids don't have money, so they don't matter. And queer kids especially don't matter. So despite the fact that literally this was a life or death situation, here's what these kids did in this group too. These kids taught themselves history. These kids cleaned up parks. These kids raised money for mental health awareness resources. These kids did research on mental health awareness. They were a group these kids tried to change our structure for ticketing students for not having parking passes so that poor kids could still drive to school the first couple of months of school when they couldn't afford the parking pass. These were the kids that the school was sacrificing. So I knew then I'm now in this precarious situation where going back to the school through no fault of my own actually puts my kids in danger, because people are now attacking these students because I exist. There was that aspect of it. The school also, in a post-Trump world, started getting really brave about telling the students that they couldn't do things or attacking the students. They started saying that the students' posters hanging everywhere was me shoving gay stuff down people's throats. They started telling those students that they couldn't share LGBTQ related things at school. And so all of that just started making me think that K through 12 is not a place for queer people. And the truth is, I would tell any young person going into teaching at all, if you are queer, you will not be safe, period. Go into it knowing that. If you are willing to do it, do it. I would also say to anybody who wants to go into teaching, I think teaching is kind of like the military now. I don't think anyone can do it for life. I think those will be few people. I think it's something you do for a few years to try to hold back the waters until we fix this system. But for now, no one should make a career bet. You just can't, because you're going to be asked.
It doesn't pay enough to do it.
That's an entirely different argument that is bad. I might have had the highest scores out of anyone in my high school, but I'm making 30% less than anyone else with a degree, despite the fact that I have 3 of them. And the truth is, every single teacher that I know who has walked away has found better paying jobs within a month.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, I struggled with too, because I wanted to have a session this summer where I taught teachers how to, because teachers use CVs, not traditional resumes, how to parlay their experience in teaching into other jobs. And I feel really guilty about it because it seems like, oh, you want to help them get out of education, but I just want people to be free. I want people who are in education to be there, not because it's their only option, but because they want to be there. And people who are in pain, people who are hurting, people who are queer and who aren't safe, I want them out if they want out. Right. And I have to turn my oven off.
Right. All right. So while we're waiting on him to come back, just so you guys know, he has a book called Gay Poems for Red States. It's at Barnes and Nobles and on Amazon and all that. You can get that, and we'll talk about that. First, I have a question, and then we'll get into that because I think you only have about 15 minutes left. Mm-hmm. And we do have to stay on for like a couple minutes to let it upload, or we'll lose the whole thing. But so all that ends up with you just going, all right, I'm bowing out. I'm bowing out, and then you write this book called Gay Poems for Red States. And the next thing you know, this gay kid from up the holler is having a book release in New York. He's on Good Morning America. Like this, you get the experience. What was that like as a kid from the holler in Floyd County? Like, I've been to New York and I've been to some cities, and like it's a totally different experience. I can't imagine, having a book a whole thing there. So,
I've yet to process what the heck is happening. And all I know is I'm grateful. I'm grateful for all of it. But, so when all this sort of broke down, I had dreamt this life up when I was a kid of what I would be and what it would look like. And I saw it die. I knew that dream is dead. There is no way that I'm a queer teacher back in a school in Eastern Kentucky. Like, it's not going to happen. Maybe for another 10 years, maybe never. Maybe this dream I had that I would someday be free is gone too. I don't know. I'm going to fight for it. But I had this moment in DC when one of the only other queer teacher in my department, they they were attacking her constantly. So she had a private TikTok, and she had a rap song in the back of her TikTok that had a single cuss word in it, and they suspended her for 2 weeks, and said that she was a danger to children because of the cuss word. I mean, it was all fake. There were teachers at that school who literally had TikToks where they're like drinking and playing, doing all kinds of stuff. None of that mattered because they weren't queer. So I knew in that moment, like, and it's over, it's dead. And it was the day before. It was the week I met the president. So there's this whole crazy idea that like here's this kid who had this dream, and now here's me like doing all these big things, and I'm destroying his dream. And I didn't know how to reconcile all that. I saw a TED Talk that week, and in the TED Talk, a woman, a teacher named Becky, I think her last name is Oglesby, but I could be wrong, but her first name is Becky. She talked about living through a tornado with her students, how they were in kindergarten in Oklahoma, I think, and first the electricity goes out, and then the building starts shaking. So she's in the bathroom with them, huddled around them when the walls start lifting away. And this is when she knows, like, this is it. This is real. And she starts looking at the kids and saying, we're going to go home soon. But she did not mean it the way the kids were hearing it. And I had to walk out of this TED Talk because I said, this has been my life. I feel like I've been in a tornado with these kids, and now the walls are leaving. And instead of standing there holding around them, I'm abandoning them. And another teacher of the year saw me walk out, and I think she knew what I was thinking. So she walked out and asked if she could hug me, and I said yes. And then she said, "Can I say something to you?" And I said yes. And she said, "Even Dumbledore had to leave Hogwarts." It was exactly what I needed to hear. It was exactly what I needed to hear. That reminder that there are many paths and there's one destination. So, to even backtrack a little bit, I wanted to write my superintendent an angry email. So
Right.
I typed his name in the inbox, started to write, and instead of writing, I started writing a poem. It actually became the first poem in that book. I didn't know what I was doing, but my entire body needed to write this poem. And it was written from the perspective of that little boy in the holler, specifically a little boy at McDonald's in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, who just wanted a girl's toy, who was shamed for getting it. And I didn't know what in the heck was happening. Like, why am I writing this poem? And then I wrote another one, and then another one. And I realized this little boy already knew he already knew what was happening.
There was an overflow everywhere.
Yeah. He had lived this many, many times before. And I tried not to remember him because it was too painful to remember him. But he existed somewhere inside of me. And so he was telling me, this is the same story. I already know what's happening. Don't you see? The world is trying to tell you that you can't have what you want, and that you don't get choices, and that you don't get things. And you already know this isn't true because I got you to where you are. Don't you? So it was his "don't you dare" moment with me.
Yeah.
And I let that little boy talk. And then I had a book, and from it was in honor of that kid who looked at me and said, "Don't you dare unlearn this lesson that I learned. Don't you dare be silent when I was silent for 18 years so that you could get to where you were." So I started talking. I started talking like nobody's business. I didn't even have social media before 2002 or 22 when I was teacher of the year. The Department of Education, they were like, "Yeah, you have to have it." So I was like, "Okay." So I got Twitter first, and I started talking. And then literally, I think when you speak truth and you've held it in that long, I think people just respond. So something like I had 200 followers in a single tweet, had 65,000 responses. And then, the Congress, Jamie Raskin, reaches out to me to say, "Hey, do you want to speak before Congress about the stuff that you're talking about?" Jamie Raskin, who did the January the 6th committee. And then I kept thinking, okay, this is what I've got to do for this kid. I've got to get his story, because I learned a lot about him. I learned a lot from that kid. I learned that the world wants to help you. I learned that the world is a good place. And sometimes we are so hell bent on fighting the little fights in front of us that we do not see that we don't even need to. We can sail right over those fights. And so that's been this year. That was, I reached out to Robert Geip right out of Hazard. who's one of my favorite authors of all time, and I was like, hey. I had a contract that someone had offered me for my book, and I was like, "Is this a good contract?" And he was like, "Send me what you wrote." I would have never in a million years reached out to Robert Guy because I'd have been afraid to talk to him or given him
Right.
my work. The same for Good Morning America. I just thought this kid's story matters, so I
It's kind
digged.
of how I feel right now. It's kind of
Yeah,
like the moment I'm doing right now.
and you're doing so well.
Yeah.
I can't open social media without you popping up immediately. And I
Yeah.
never get on TikTok. I know I'm an old man, but the videos take so long. But I mean, if I open up TikTok, you're every third video. So yeah,
Nice.
it's over. I don't feel like it's me doing. The short answer is I don't even feel like it's me doing this stuff. I feel like it's that little kid. And then I
Yeah.
remember, like, you are that little kid. There's no difference. You're the same
There's no
person.
difference.
Uh,
Yep. That little kid is who shaped the adult you.
yeah,
Like
and
all of his experiences crafted who you are today.
yes, and that's the impetus as well right now for me to fight for these young people because I remember that young kid that I was, and so I remember just how much they deserve to have somebody fighting for them too.
And now, with the title of your book, to me, in my mind, it points to something. You had to write a book called, Gay Poems for Red States. And it points at a very specific problem that the states get to make their own laws to discriminate against people based off their sexuality or their religion or their intellectual disability. Like, I can relate a little bit because of autism. Like, I was born this way. Like, I get that.
Yes,
It's not a choice. But also, as an autistic person, my autonomy can be completely ripped away. Um, and so, these red states, they're never going. I mean, if we keep waiting on them, the
hmm
damage is going to be generational and generational and generational. What federal thing needs to happen to just settle this?
I think there's so many things that we need to sell this. There's a plethora of bills that exist that we've been trying to get passed to offer federal protection to LGBTQ people. We need federal protection for people with any sort of difference in how they express life and how they process life that can be used against them economically.
Right.
We this should not be partisan. And that's what's most frustrating. I talked earlier about this whole idea of like people see me as anti-school, and I think people who worship capitalism see anything that isn't letting anyone do whatever they want to other people as anti-capitalist. But the truth is, we should be pro-human. And if you want to use capitalism as a system, like any other system, you can abuse it or you can use it in good ways. We could use it in ways that don't harm people. But that's not the choice that we make. Capitalism with
Right.
restrictions, with some restrictions, might work. So one, we definitely have to, if we're going to have this system, pass protections that acknowledge that there are people who deserve.
Everyone.
Yes, absolutely everyone. And I think the other thing is just freaking get rid of gerrymandering. There is no chance in the United States of America that we're going to have a look at Kentucky, who elected a governor who is a Democrat, but who could not even potentially touch the House because you can't gerrymander a governor election. I think those
No.
two alone would change a lot. And I think the other thing is for people in blue states.
And Mitch McConnell has been in there since 1986, and
Yeah.
I've never met a single person who liked him.
hmm And let's be honest. This will be my final
Yeah.
call to action. People in blue states need to stop looking at people in red states as if they have nothing to offer. I can walk into any room in California and 6 out of 10 people are liberal and 4 out of 10 people are conservative. I can walk into any room in Kentucky and
Right.
6 out of 10 people are conservative and 4 out of 10 people are liberal. So the difference is two people. And you're not going to find anybody more progressive than a Kentuckian with a trans child who is fighting desperately for her safety. I can't stand
Facts.
I want to live in
Facts.
conservative places because the liberal and the progressive people that I meet are way more liberal and way more progressive and understand things with more nuance than the people who grow up in echo chambers who think that
Yeah.
they're better than anyone from a red state. So that's what we need more than anything else is more literature, more work, more art coming from red states and people in red states who often won't even try liberal politics because they are mocked and
They're
disenfranchised.
scared. They're
Yeah.
scared of them. They the fear mongering. And I'll let you go. Tell us where you can get your book and things like that, and then we'll hit pause. It can upload. But where can I'll tag your
Thank you.
social media and stuff. But where can
Sure.
we grab your book?
You can get Gay Poems for Red States really at any large place that sells them. You can get it at Amazon or Barnes and Nobles. Contact your local bookstore. Please ask them to bring it in if you can. Local bookstores have been absolutely fantastic in making sure that I get this book out. And then finally, you can always go to your library. I'm proud to say that I am in libraries in 37 countries.
Nice.
And love the idea that one, people don't have to spend money to get this book, and two, that it's there for posterity for other people to get to, so that we can share more Appalachian stories. Jono, thank you so much
Thank you.
for having
Thank you.
me.
Thank you.
Good luck
Thank
with
you for
the
coming
show.
on.
I have a feeling you're going to be super successful.
Hey, this is Jono's World. Conversation for everybody.